Are they netjeru? Are they gods? Are they principles? Are they cosmic laws? Really, what are they? That's profound. Peace and blessings. This is Derric Moore. And in this video, I want to talk about what are the netjeru. All right. Are the netjeru, are they gods? Are they forces of nature? Are they attributes, principles? What are they? Okay. In this video, that's just what we want to talk about. First of all, I want to say that I've been wanting to do this video for the longest time. Part of the reason why I haven't done this video is mainly because every time I was doing the readings were like, I didn't get a go ahead. All right. Here recently, I got the go ahead. In other words, I got all heads up, which basically meant, hey, I got approval to go ahead and do that because everything was in alignment. And this is why I'm doing this video. Okay. Before we begin, first of all, I want to remind you, I've made this in the previous video, or I talked about this in the previous video. Whenever we're talking about Kemetic spirituality, there's always three perspectives you have to always keep in mind. There is the metaphysical perspective, there is the mystical and spiritual perspective, and there is the occult perspective. Okay. Now, these are all perspectives that basically all share. All right. And I'm going to go through each one of them, but before I actually, tell you what my actual perspective of them is. All right. First of all, when you first start off in Kemetic spirituality, I used to have this belief, or this used to be my only belief, I should say. And that is that I believe that once upon a time, that the Kemetic, the netjeru were basically, principles. Okay. Whenever you started reading, or whenever I started reading about Kemetic spirituality, I started reading about, the quote unquote, when you hear the Egyptologists and archaeologists, they say the gods and goddesses and so forth. When I started doing the comparison, I noticed that they were not like the Kemetic netjeru were nothing like the Greek and Roman gods. Okay, the big difference between the two is that if you ever read Greek and Roman lore, the legends, or for that matter, most of the Western, Western lores and legends and what have you, if you read about very different gods and goddesses, you'll find that a lot of times everything that they did, everything that the people did, it was based upon the will of the gods. Okay. This basically has translated and basically has spiraled down to present day Western culture now, and it exists in Christianity. Whereas you hear people say, well, if it's God's will, if God's wills be done, or God willingly, then I will be able to do this, or I'll be able to, this is going to happen, or whatever the case is. So from the Western perspective, everything was based upon this superpower, or based upon, this invisible superpower. And these invisible superpowers or super forces, invisible forces, were the ones who basically controlled and determined the fate of humanity. Okay, that's not the case in Kemetic spirituality. In Kemetic spirituality, people went ahead and they did whatever they wanted to do. They made choices, and based upon their choices, the netjeru supported them. Okay, so if you look at Kemetic history, you look at the the Kemetic legends and so forth and so on. Okay, this is a different perspective. So from that understanding, that the difference between Kemetic spirituality versus Western legend and Western lores and spirituality is that it is not these blind or these invisible forces or these invisible, these gods and goddesses that determine humanity's fate. It is the choices that humanity makes that determines which force or which spiritual force is going to come to them. Based upon that understanding, okay, the netjeru from a metaphysical perspective are forces of nature. Okay, they're forces of nature. They're attributes. They are, like I said, they're forces of nature, they're attributes. And this is how the Kemetic people viewed them. Okay, this is one of the ways in which the Kemetic people viewed them. All right, from a spiritual perspective, one of the other things I noticed is that, and this is one of the perspectives I held as well. From a spiritual perspective, the Kemetic netcharu are viewed as being archetypes. Okay, now an archetype is basically it's a model, all right, and what I found is that there was this tendency, for people to say, hey, guess what, they're aspiring to be like a particular netcher, they're aspiring to be like Offset, they're aspiring to be more, they're aspiring to be more like Nebhet or Heteru or so forth and so on, okay? This is one of the perspectives that I found that the netjeru, that they are, which means that from a spiritual perspective or from a mystical perspective, they are archetypes. They are, they're models. They are, like I said, they're someone or something to aspire to be like, okay? But, and that's one perspective. Again, I'm not knocking it or anything. I'm just saying that that is one of the perspectives that also exist, and I agree with that as well. But within the last few years or so, and I've been testing this out and everything, within the last few years, I have come to the conclusion that that the netjeru are all of those above. They are the forces of nature. They are cosmic laws. They are attributes of the divine. They are archetypes. They are cosmic laws. I think I said that, I'm not sure, but they're cosmic laws. But the other thing that I believe that the netjeru are, this is based upon my experience, is that they are ancestral spirits. Okay? Now, it took me a while to actually come to this conclusion. All right? And this conclusion basically, it was derived from actual experience, actual research, and a little bit of analytical studying and comparison and so forth. We begin by first of all understanding that, remember, the Kemetic people, according to Sir E.A. Wallace Budge, okay, according to other archaeologists, the Kemetic people bear a lot of cultural resemblance to a lot of traditional Africans that exist throughout the African continent, primarily Central and West Africa. Okay? If we assume, or if we say, hey, the Kemetic people are African people, all right? And these African people, they have these cultural similarities similar to other traditional African people, all right? Then when you look at these cultures, these other ethnic groups, such as the Bakongo, such as the Yoruba, the Akan, you look at the spiritual tradition of the Fan. If you look at all these cultural groups and you look at how did their divinities become divinities, okay? One of the most popular themes that exist, or theories, I should say, that exist throughout the African continent as well as throughout the African diaspora in regards to how these divinities became divinities is that once upon a time they were ancestral spirits. Okay, they were ancestral spirits. We might not have record of their actual physical existence, of how they lived or whatever the case may be, but what we know is that they were ancestral spirits. Okay, how do these ancestral spirits basically, how did they become quote unquote netjeru, or gods and goddesses or so forth? Okay, according to, if you look at, again, do this comparison with most of your traditional African religions, you'll find that ancestral spirits, basically, the first level, the basic level of an ancestral spirit is that it's a biological relative, who basically they passed on. This biological relative, for the most part, they were, they did good things, they were, and I don't want to say good things, but they were, ethical, they were moral, they were upright, standing individual. They did things, that basically support the family, support others as well. When this individual passes on, what happens is that they are basically, they're honored and venerated, as an ancestor, okay? Which means that the family of that individual, basically they can call upon this ancestor for all kind of blessings. They can call upon them to bless the family, to bless the home, to protect the family land, so forth and so on. If the popularity of that ancestral spirit moves beyond the family unit to the point that you have it's not just the family who's honoring them, but there's a tribe of people outside the family unit, the immediate family unit that is honoring, then that ancestral spirit now transitions, or basically is elevated to the next level, which is for the most part kind of like what we would call the equivalent of a spirit guide. If that ancestral spirit moves to a spirit guide, and then as a spirit guide, their popularity continues to grow, they're continuing to be honored, they're continuing to be honored by people within the family, outside the family, by the tribe, outside the tribe, and it goes to all of a sudden now they're honored nationally. They're honored by people all over for the most part, we can say the country or even the world. Then that ancestral spirit has transcended, or they transcend from being an ancestral spirit to a spirit guide, from a spirit guide basically into a netjeru, okay, into what is called, what people would call gods and goddesses, or aloha, okay. There's many cases of ancestral spirits who basically, because of the life they lived, because of the things they did for the people, that have ascended to that godlike status, okay. Now, what that means then is that the netjeru, from this perspective, are ancestral spirits. So when we talk about, and understand when I'm saying ancestral spirits, I'm not just speaking of one spirit, I'm speaking of a whole host or a whole group of spirits. So in other words, what I'm saying is, when we see, for instance, you see Osiris or Osiris, okay? Osiris or Osiris is basically the title that is given to a group of ancestral spirits who fill that role as being Osirian, meaning that these are spirits that basically are all about unifying people. These are, on a higher accord. These are all spirits that are all focused on, they're focused on peace, they focus on prosperity, they're focused on cultivating the land, to get people together, so forth and so on. They are the earth shakers, they are up under, they work on the underground, they work in the underworld, These are all those spirits, okay? It's not just one of them. It's a bunch of them, okay? Or a group of them. And they're all ancestral spirits, okay? An example I have of this, proof of this, and this is one of my theories. This is how I kind of came to this, or it was shown to me. If you go back and you look at Kemetic history, the first king to unite the Kemetic people, his name was Narmer, or Means, okay? Narmer or Means is the first king that you see to unite the people, just like Osiris did, or Osiris, okay? Osiris and Osiris and Narmer, they're not the same individual, but they fulfill the same role. We know that Narmer, or King Means, we know that he was a living individual. We know that he was the first king, according to Kemetic history, to unite the people, which means that basically King Mings or Narmer basically ascended to the level based upon the things that he did, based upon the life he lived, based upon all historical records. He ascended to that level and became an Osirian spirit. Was he the first Osirian spirit? I don't think so. But he's an Osirian spirit, okay? And this is how he becomes a netcharu, all right? Another example that I've had in regards to, that kind of helped me to understand this from an occult perspective. I remember, I was working with, I'm working with my ancestral spirits, and I always work with my ancestral spirits and other spirits that basically come. And I noticed that there was a tendency that a lot of my ancestral spirits, even though they didn't know anything about ancient Egypt, they didn't know anything about Kemetic culture, Kemetic spirituality, because, I am the ambassador of my family line. I'm the ambassador that deals with the whole ancestor thing, okay? No one within my family that I know of, all right, deals with it, all right? And no one within my family line, okay, within my present family line has actually come out and said, hey, guess what, I deal with, I deal with spirits. I'm the only one that's done this, okay? So I am the ambassador of my family line, all right? But I've noticed there was always this tendency, there was always this case of some of my ancestral spirits, they always want their articles, their artifacts, okay? And that's basically little things that help me to connect with them that are on my ancestor altar. They will always have these artifacts. They always want these artifacts placed next to my Ampu altar, okay? Ampu or Anubis altar, right? Now, again, like I said, these ancestors, I know they didn't know anything about Kemetic spirituality. And I remember one time asking, and I kept asking, why do they want this, And I mean, when I'm saying they want to be placed there, they want their artifacts, I'm inspired to put, some of their belongings there, their belongings next to the Ampu altar. And I always wonder, why do they want to be placed there? What's the whole significance of them doing that? Why do they want to be placed there? And one time I remember asking that, and I, had a dream. And in that dream, I was shown basically, there's a whole bunch of them. When I woke up from the dream, I had the answer. And the answer was, there is a bunch of Ampus there that are assisting the ancestral spirits, or I'm sorry, that were assisting my ancestral spirits, okay? So when I actually started doing a little, I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, what does that mean? If you go back and you look at Kemetic mythology, okay, or you look at the Kemetic lore, you find out that Ampu, or, as I said, Anubis, is a psychopomp. Psychopomps, just like the Yoruba Legba, just like Ilegua, and just like, in Brazil, the Exus, there's a bunch of them. There's a whole family of them. And it makes perfectly good sense because they are all basically, it's a similar type of spiritual energy, okay? So when I went ahead and like I said, what the dream was basically revealing to me was that there's not just one Ampu. We're taught, or we read about this, and we think that there's just one Ampu or one Anubis. No, there is a family of them. There is a bunch of them, okay? And if you go back and you look at, if you do a comparison, you look at the Yoruba religion, they'll tell you, oh, well, there's 21 passive Eshu, all right? I don't know. I haven't even done that kind of study to find out how many passive Ampu there are. But I know that there's numerous of them. There's a bunch of them, okay? And some of the Ampus that I've even come across I've come across an older version of an Ampu. I've come across, an older version, kind of like of a older man Ampu who wears that dog-headed or jackal-headed mask. I've come across a younger version of Ampu. I've come across a children version of Ampu. So there's a bunch of Ampus. And when I started doing, what the spirits were basically telling me was that The reason why my ancestral spirits, they want to be placed next to there is because the Ampus that I had on my altar, they're assisting them, they're helping them make that transition, they're helping them to elevate and to grow. Okay. And this is part of the reason why I keep showing this Ampu altar. And understand, this is not my actual Ampu altar. Okay. This is a mock Ampu altar, but I keep showing it to kind of help people to understand that this is not just one spirit. This is a bunch of spirits. There's numerous Ampus that exist. Okay. So the reason why I'm telling you this, and the reason why I'm sharing this, is because I'm trying to go ahead and hopefully I'm making a good case, and hopefully I'm helping you to, get a little bit of clarity of this, of understanding that it's not just, the netcharu are not just, they're not just cosmic laws. They're not just attributes. They're not just archetypes. The netcharu are all of the above. And the best way that I found to really work with them and understand who they are is seeing them as ancestral spirits, a group of ancestral spirits. Okay. It reminds me of a quote that I remember hearing, a quote that kind of helped me to come into this understanding. And I believe his name is Jay Brody. He was an occultist. And one of the things he said is that, gods and spirits, they may or may not exist, but the universe behaves as if they do. Okay. And that quote basically helped me to understand. It helped me to come into the understanding that, this is a whole lot bigger than what a lot of us try to make it seem. You can't intellectualize this only. Again, as I've stated before, there's a part where the intellect, scientific and rational reasoning, it ends and the occult begins. All right. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I hope that, kind of gives you a little bit of understanding, a little better understanding of who the netjeru are. Again, part of the reason for showing this is because I think that, besides the fact that it was time, but part of the reason for sharing this is that, like I said, if you are working with ancestral spirits, if you're working with spirits, you'll start to see and understand that connection of why they are connecting to you the way they are. If you're a beginner and you're starting this, hopefully this will help you to get a better understanding of why it's important to start working with your ancestors, but at the same time help you to get a better understanding of how to connect with the netjeru. Okay. And the reason why you might not have that connection with them is because of an ancestral spirit. Okay. Now, another reason for sharing this, and I forgot, this is also that's coming to mind, is that this helps you to also realize that the netjeru are basically, yes, they're forces that exist throughout the universe. But from this understanding now, we get they also exist within us. Okay, because now if you're connecting and you understand that they're ancestral spirits, then you see that they're ancestral spirits that exist within us, which means that we are not separated. We are not divorced from this. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity and a better understanding of how to actually approach the netjeru, and a better understanding of how to even work with them. As I've mentioned to you before, if you got any comments, got any questions, suggestions or so, feel free to drop me a line. As I've stated before, thanks for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until next time, Ampu. Peace.